life. حتى إذا جاء أحدهم الموت. The verse in Surah Al-Mu'minun clearly underscores this point. It's that particular moment of death coming that people suddenly realize, because now they can see the future. Suddenly they realize what they have done, and those who have not done well ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to return them. At that, not when they have gone to Barzakh. No, at that particular moment. Or there is another verse that I recited few nights ago, فَجَاءَتْ سَكْرَةُ الْمَوْتِ. When this trance of death comes, suddenly people remember, and because they can see the future and the past, suddenly they can remember, now what have we done? Is there a possibility of going back? So this concept of Barzakh, hereafter, Ma'ad, and everything else, this constitutes an extremely important and rich topic, and huge number of literature we have in Islam in both schools of theology regarding the concept of Ma'ad, what happens in the future, etc. Muslims from early days of Islam, have been made aware of the importance and the significance of the hereafter by the Holy Prophet, as well as the number of verses that have been removed, and constantly told to remember death. Because remembering death reminds everyone that this life that we have ultimately is going to come to an end. It's a transient life. It will finish. And repeatedly in the Holy Quran, we see various verses that reminds the reader that at the end of the day, no matter what we do, we have to leave everything behind. We are reminded that remember the day or the moment in which would make children gray-haired. This is in Surah 73 and verse 17. فَكَيْفَ تَتَّقُونَ إِن كَفَرْتُمْ يَوْمًا يَجْعَلُ الْوِلْدَانَ شِيبًا. What do you think about the day in which the enormity of the circumstance is such that even young children's hair turns white very quickly? There is a story here from Marhum Allama Tabatabai. We might think that it is a joke or it's a playfulness. No, it's serious. Marhum Allama Tabatabai, the author of Al-Mizan, narrates from his own teacher, Marhum Allama Qadhi, one of the grand Arif of his time and mystic of his time. This is an incident that happened to him. He said, next to us, this goes back during the time where in Iraq the Ottomans were in charge. He said, next to us there was a family, the Pasha family of the Ottoman descent, that they lived next door. The mother died, and the daughter became so distraught and crying that even when they wanted to bury the mother, she would not let go of the coffin, and she said that I want to stay in the grave. They couldn't separate her from her mother, and they couldn't force her. So they allowed her, they came to some kind of arrangement, allowing her to stay in the grave with her mother's body, but they would cover the grave with a piece of either carton or a piece of wood, allowing air to flow down, so she stays over there. Next morning, her family, which were Turks, they decided, and naturally they were Sunnis, they decided to go back to this grave and find out what happened to this girl. When they opened the cover, they found out that the girl is alive, but her hair was completely white. They said, you are 12, 13 years old, or 15 years old. How comes that you suddenly have this gray hair? she narrates the story that after you left and you covered the grave, suddenly I realized two people walking into the grave and asking my mom few questions. Those that she was able to answer, they didn't say anything. But those who were not, that she was not able to answer, they beat her up with the stick that they had, that it felt as if her body is engulfed in fire. The enormity of the circumstance, when I was watching it, this is what happened to me. So the verse, in kafartum yawman yaj'alul wildana shiba, is a fact. The enormity of the circumstance is such that if a child goes through it, immediately becomes too old for his age. What is a pity, that despite the fact that when we read the Holy Quran, there are so many verses that reminds us of the Day of Judgment, reminds us of the punishment, reminds us of the fact that this life is transient, but on our daily life, we behave as if death doesn't exist, or far away concept that probably will never come. That is fundamentally something that we have to pay attention to. That ultimately, no matter what we do, death is as real as anything else that we can imagine in our life. Constantly we see people, whether it's friends, relatives, parents, somebody else, departing this world. And occasionally we go behind their coffin. But as soon as we get home, we're back to square one, as if it didn't exist. The story goes from the life of Amir al-Mu'mineen, salawatullah salam alayhi, that they were following a janazah, and somebody jokingly began to smile or crack jokes or something. Imam said that you're behaving as if this is not going to happen to you. You are not thinking about the enormity of the circumstance that you might be next. Otherwise, somebody who sees this, they have to reflect. That reflection doesn't exist in our life. We go behind the janazah and we come back, continuing as crooked as we were before. No change. Despite the fact that it is probably one of the concepts that has been repeated in the Holy Quran more often than anything else. Why? Because if you look at the Jahiliyyah at the time, the idea that afterlife existed, or they will be resurrected after they die, it was not in their vocabulary. What they thought, for them, death was the end of the road, and that's it. وَقَالُوا مَا هِيَ إِلَّا حَيَاتُنَا الدُّنْيَا نَمُوتُ وَنَحْيَا. After this, the whole thing is to do with this life. There is nothing after it. So one of the most eloquent ways that Quran deals with this concept is the notion of creating pairs between various concepts. Quran says, this claim has been refuted, that everything in this world is there as a pair. Life, death. Here, hereafter. Dunya, akhirah. Heaven, earth. Or heaven and hell. So this pair, the concept that these two are pairs, always remind us that at the moment we are living here, but ultimately we have to go to the hereafter. What we do in our life, how we behave, is critical. So the concept of Ma'ad and the hereafter, as well as Barzakh, which is in the middle, is a very critical concept that is supposed to serve and regulate and govern our life, so that, and our belief, so that we behave and we submit to the command of Allah, and we don't allow the material life to take over and we become slave to the material life. الناس عبيد الدنيا. They are not allowed this, so this will not happen. So if we go back to Barzakh, at the moment of death, a soul proceeds to this interim place that is between the life, this life, material life, and the hereafter. One of the most distinct and frightening yet significant is the question of answer. The question of that we will be asked by either two angels about the story of Allama Tabatabai and how this affects us. The moment of death, while we see, although we have in tradition that says it's the first night when the body is put in the grave that the Nakir, Munkar and Nakir are coming, but technically it's the moment somebody dies and sees the future, is literally his destiny is clear. But they have to go through this process, and talqeen, when we put the body inside the grave, the person that sits on top of this body and reminds the body of the son of so and so. Remember when the two malak, Munkar and Nakir, come, this is what you have to say. They are going to ask you who is your Lord, etc., etc. So this is the most difficult and most frightening circumstance. There are a huge amount of literature that reminds us that when we depart, beforehand we have to be mindful of the question that is going to take place. And the outcome of these questions would determine whether the grave is going to be turned into a ditch of hell or some kind of a space from heaven. If the Munkar and Nakir come and ask you a question, ask me a question, if I were to be able to go through this and answer all their question according to Hadith says, then Munkar and Nakir, they leave, and this qabr, the grave, turns into a beautiful space, miniature scale of heaven until the Day of Judgment. But if they determine that this person really has a lot to answer or wasn't able to answer, then the other side. There are some hadith that says it's not clear cut of either or. There are a group of people that somewhere in the middle, and they are left in suspense until the Day of Judgment when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides. This is we can see it in a hadith from Amir al-Mu'mineen and other imams. That these two malaks or two angels are going to ask about God, deen, your faith, prophet, who is your prophet, who is your imam, who is your Kaaba, what is your Kaaba or place of worship, what is your kitab, a book, etc., etc. And how does a person or a deceased person respond? If they pass, then be it. If God forbid they fail, then Barzakh, or stay in that particular period as an intermediary between this life and the hereafter, becomes extremely painful. Some people say the reason why some people find it very difficult to let go and the soul takes so long to come out with agony is because the person sees the future and is afraid of letting go and ultimately facing the future. And grand scholars have talked about this huge amount. القبر روضة من رياض الجنة أو حفرة من حفر النار. If I see it naturally, Abu Dhar is asked, why, Ya Abu Dhar, why are we afraid of death? He responds, because it's a concept which is not familiar to you, unknown, and you haven't prepared for it. لأنكم أمرتم الدنيا وَخَرَّبْتُمُ الْآخِرَةَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeatedly in Quran and a hadith from Ahlul Bayt, they have reminded you that ultimately your destination is not here, it's somewhere else. So get ready to prepare your house in the hereafter. You've put your focus purely on the material world. And you did not pay attention to the hereafter. When you do this, at the moment of the departure of soul, when your vision, فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ, when your vision becomes sharp and you see it, you realize what have you done, and you are not prepared to let go and face the reality outside. This is why some people, Ahlul Bayt, Anbiya, Awliya, they give up their life and their soul departs while they are smiling because they know where they are going to. But people like myself who are the sinners, when we are confronted with the reality, we don't want to let go. That's the painful. This is why ruh and soul take so long, so an agonizing moment. There is a hadith in Nahj al-Balagha regarding the stages of death. Please read it. And you see Imam graphically tells you as person lies on the ground and how soul slowly departs. And every time that it departs, one goes from one stage to other, we lose one of our faculties. We lose the tongue first, then we lose the ear the second, then we lose the eyes third. The intellectual capacity is still there. We can comprehend a little bit, and ultimately it goes. It exists in Nahj al-Balagha. The next major question about Barzakh that ulama have talked about is a critical question. Can we, as human beings living on this earth, communicate with the souls that have been departed from this earth and they have gone into Barzakh? Is it something that we can communicate with them or not? There are differences of opinion. One opinion that says dead cannot interact with the living, and any attempt to communicate is made by, at least with the four schools of thought, the Sunnah. By the Sunni schools of thought, they say it is haram to make any attempt to communicate with the departed one. It's haram and cannot be done. So not only they say that communication is not possible because they are dead, and because they are dead, they cannot communicate, but even attempt to communicate with them is not allowed. In our theology, we believe that it is possible. But here I have to explain one thing. That exactly what we mean by communication between us and the deceased. We believe that in the Holy Quran, there are instances in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously has brought back certain group of people from death. We have a story of Kahf, that Allah, they slept or died for 309 years, and Allah brought them back. Or the story of Uzair, that prophet, that Allah took his soul for 100 years and then brought him back and said, look, how you were in doubtful or you didn't have certainty about how I'll reconstruct the world. Look at your donkey, how the flesh on the bone and everything else we would do. And even regarding the return of our living Imam, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif, we believe that out of the 313 persons that are going to come, most of them are dead. They are not living at the time of the return. But yet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala miraculously bring these people back because they deserve to stand with the Imam and fight and establish justice. This is not what we mean by communication, that Quran, that somehow the deceased comes back on earth and resurrected again and talks to us. What we mean is that the soul remains in Barzakh. No doubt about it. There is no return of the soul to this world. But can such a soul communicate with the world it has just left behind, or can the living communicate with the soul that has been departed? Our scholars and Urafa, they say yes, it can. But there are certain conditions that must be fulfilled. Number one, and the medium by which this communication takes place is through dreams. Why? Because during the night, our soul is removed from our body with little bit of connection between the soul and the body. Allah يتوفى الأنفس حين موتها والتي لم تمت في منامها. Death and sleep is very close. Because during the night, and particularly if we are pure-hearted, the soul elevates or ascends, then during this ascension, they can make communication with the soul of those who are deceased. They come across each other. So it is possible only when one sleeps, and when somebody is pious and pure-hearted, they will be able to communicate with the soul. And even souls come to them, ask them for help. We normally see either our parents, I don't know how many of you have got people deceased, I'm sure we all have, and how many of you have seen the deceased person. Sometimes we see them, particularly at the beginning of the journey when they have just left, in a very beshackled, very rough, which indicates that they are going through a terrible time. And the fact that they appear in that condition means, please help. Then after a period of sadaqat, salat, and everything else for them, we see them, a change has taken place in their status. This is clearly a communication between those who have departed and us. Because the scholars claim that when the soul of the sleeping person is elevated, at this elevation, communication with the deceased or the soul of those who are in Barzakh is possible. There are those who are pure-hearted. These are the grand scholars and Urafa. They can communicate because of the power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them. They can communicate with the deceased willingly. You don't need to go to sleep, or sometimes during sleep. We have a number of stories from ulama in the past that they predict or they inform their audience that, say, grand scholar so-and-so has just passed away, although the grand scholar was living in a different country and they were living somewhere else. A story from Sayyid Jamal al-Paigani, which was one of the grand scholars, moved from Isfahan to Iraq. He was able, because he was able to predict. One night he told his son Muhammad that go and check the house of such a person, or one of the grand scholars. And he said, when I got over there, I realized that everybody is going inside and commiserating with the family. Then I went back, I asked him, he said, I just saw one of the deceased grand scholars that came, and he said that I'm going to go to the aza of this person, which indicating that this person has departed. There is a hadith that says, Abdi ata'ni, my servant, submit to me. Aj'aluka mathali, get pure-hearted, elevate yourself, and I would grant you powers similar to my power. And one of these powers, when the veil is removed, you can see reality outside. So certain people do have this capability. Others, people like myself, no, we don't. So these people say not only the deceased can communicate, we also can communicate with them if we are pure-hearted and the veil is removed. This is just the concept of Barzakh. I would like to remind everyone that because of the limited time, I only scratching the surface of talking about these issues. It's such a complex issue and so much literature existing. The next one is exactly the concept of death and the hereafter. This one, we will talk about it inshallah tomorrow night. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا Oh Lord, don't punish us if we were to make mistakes or if we go astray. These are critical nights. The month of Ramadan, with all the blessing, if we could use it for the purification of the soul and getting ourselves ready. I have repeatedly mentioned that soon Layal al-Qadr will come, and during the nights of power, we're going to stand in front of Allah and say, "Oh Lord, change my destiny." But we haven't done anything to support our petition for the change. Then it will be a loss. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله. اللهم صل على